Get those trucks moving. This old bridge belongs to the community now.
That's what the HOA president yelled at her construction foreman as the third cement truck of the morning rolled onto a wrought iron span my great-grandfather built in 1898. I stood on my porch in slippers and a coffee mug, watching 40,000 pounds of concrete pressed down on I-bar joints the state of New York had rated for 6 tons. The driver gave me a small, apologetic wave through the windshield. Then he kept driving. That's the thing about HOA presidents with developer husbands. They start treating other people's bridges like haul roads. What she didn't know was that I spent 30 years as a senior bridge engineer for the state of New York, and the same Pratt Truss she was condemning under load was 3 weeks away from going on the National Register of Historic Places. So I didn't argue. I went inside, opened my data logger, and started recording every axle weight. Tell me below, what would you have done? My name is Everett Ashford, and the bridge the HOA decided to use as a haul road has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather, Albert Ashford, paid the Berlin Iron Bridge Company of East Berlin, Connecticut, $640 in the spring of 1898 to fabricate, ship, and erect a 112-foot wrought iron Pratt truss across Slate Creek in northeast Washington County, New York. He needed the bridge to move hay from his upper pasture to the dairy barn without fording the creek twice a day. The span was bolted together in 7 weeks. It has carried Ashford family wagons, trucks, tractors, and one ill-advised 1962 Cadillac DeVille across that creek for 126 years. It is one of only 14 surviving Berlin iron Pratt trusses left in New York State. It is, by any honest measure, the most valuable thing on the farm. I'm 58. I spent 30 years as a bridge engineer with the New York State Department of Transportation, the last 12 of those as a senior load rating specialist in the Albany office. I retired 4 years ago. Since then, I've consulted part-time for the Historic Bridge Foundation, doing forensic damage analysis on old iron and stone spans that nobody else still knows how to read. I have a graduate degree in structural engineering from Clarkson, a professional engineer's license that hangs framed above my workbench in the barn, and a battered Olympus camera with a macro lens that has photographed more fatigue cracks than I would like to count. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Her name was Lila. She taught American history at the high school in Granville for 26 years. She died of complications from multiple sclerosis on a snowy Tuesday in February, 2 months before our 35th anniversary. The day before she went, she made me promise that if the National Register ever called about the bridge, I would say yes. She loved that bridge the way some women love jewelry. The first photograph she ever showed me, on our second date in 1989, was a picture of the I-bar pin connections taken with her father's old Leica. I had no idea that night in the coffee shop in Schuylerville that I would marry a woman who knew the difference between a Pratt and a Howe truss. Our daughter Tess lives in Albany now, married to a kind man who teaches 8th grade math. They have 2 children, ages 6 and 3. I have a border collie named Pippin who supervises the property the way border collies do, which is to say with great seriousness and almost no actual authority. The bridge sits at the back of my 140 acres, where Slate Creek runs down out of the hardwood hills. The road that crosses it is officially Ashford Lane, a private right-of-way recorded on the county plat since 1902. There is a 1902 easement attached to the deed, granted by my great-grandfather to his neighbor to the north, so that wagons and farm machinery could cross the bridge to reach the upper meadows. The language is short, simple, and very specific. It permits wagons, farm wagons, agricultural implements, and the machinery of husbandry to cross, for purposes of the agricultural improvement of the dominant estate. That easement, in 2024, became the most expensive 31 words in Washington County. 2 summers ago, a developer out of Saratoga named Pell Construction Group bought the old Garrison Farm, the parcel 2 miles north of mine that the 1902 easement once served. They subdivided it into 148 luxury home sites and named the project Stonebrook Reserve. The marketing brochures promised old-world New England elegance with modern conveniences. The model home opened the following spring. The grading crews began work that summer. The Pell who owned Pell Construction Group was a man named Dalton Pell. The HOA president of Stonebrook Reserve, elected before the first house closed, was a woman named Vivian Pell. They were husband and wife. She had taken her HOA position under her maiden name, Crane, on the early bylaws, but the deeds and the corporate filings traced the connection in 5 minutes flat. Vivian was 51, heavy-set, blonde, with the kind of professionally maintained blowout that costs more than my monthly maple syrup haul. She drove a pearl Jeep Grand Cherokee Summit with a vanity plate that read VPHOA. She wore quilted vests in fall and linen vests in summer and tinted sunglasses regardless of weather. She referred to herself, in conversation and in print, as the community liaison for Stonebrook Reserve, which was a polite way of saying she was the woman who fought the fights her husband did not want to be seen fighting. The cement truck started crossing my bridge on the first Monday of April. I heard the first one before I saw it. A cement truck makes a particular sound at low speed, a low gear down grind with a steady drum rotation that you do not forget once you have heard it on a worn timber deck. I was at the kitchen window with my second cup of coffee. Pippin came in from the porch with his ears up and his head cocked. I set the cup down and walked outside in my slippers. The truck was already on the bridge. It was a 10-yard Mack with the Pell Construction Group logo down the side, white and forest green, with the words, "Built to Last," in cursive across the cab. The drum was spinning. The driver was easing forward at maybe 7 miles an hour, eyes forward, jaw tight. The bridge made the small, distinct creak I had heard once before in my career, on an old Whipple truss in Erie County that had failed an inspection the following Tuesday. The truck came off the bridge. It hauled south up Ashford Lane and disappeared around the curve toward the Garrison parcel. I stood in the yard and watched the bridge sway, very faintly, for another 6 seconds after the load left the deck. The eye bars in the lower cord made a small ringing settle, like a tuning fork dying out. I walked back inside. I picked up the phone. I called the Pell Construction Group main number listed on the truck. I spoke to a polite young woman at the front desk. I told her my name. I told her my address. I told her that a Pell vehicle had just crossed a private bridge posted at 6 tons, and that the truck was, fully loaded, somewhere north of 38 tons. I asked her to please halt all further crossings until the question of access could be resolved. She put me on hold for 2 minutes. She came back. She told me that Mrs. Pell, the HOA president of Stonebrook Reserve, would call me back within the hour to address my concerns. Mrs. Pell did not call me back within the hour. She called me back the next morning at 6:45 while I was making oatmeal. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was bright, the kind of brightness that has been practiced in a mirror. "I'm so glad we have the chance to clear this up. I understand you have some concerns about the access road. I want you to know we have looked into the easement question very carefully, and we have determined that the 1902 grant of way includes all reasonable modern use of the dominant estate, including the kind of access we currently require. Our attorney is sending you a courtesy notice this morning." I asked her if she was aware that the bridge was posted at 6 tons. She laughed, lightly. "Mr. Ashford, that posting is decades old. Modern engineering allows for much higher load tolerances than people realize. Our trucks are professionally driven. Nobody is going to hurt your bridge. We are doing our best to be a good neighbor here." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I asked her, in the calmest voice I could manage at 6:45 with cold oatmeal congealing on the stove, whether she would be willing to accept personal financial responsibility on behalf of her HOA for any damage to the bridge from this point forward. She did not laugh that time. "Mr. Ashford, I would prefer this not become adversarial. We are simply exercising our easement rights. I'm sure we can work this out." She hung up. The certified letter from Pell Construction Group's attorney arrived in the afternoon. It cited the 1902 easement. It cited a single, conveniently brief paragraph of New York case law. It demanded that I cease any interference with the rightful access of the dominant estate on penalty of suit. It claimed the easement permitted any vehicle reasonably necessary for the modern use of the property. I read the letter twice. I poured a fresh cup of coffee. I labeled a new binder on the spine in pencil, Stonebrook. The binder was thin then. By the time it stopped being thin, the bill would not be 6 tons. It would be 7 figures. That same week, I drove out to my old field office in Albany and pulled my own training manuals out of a box under the workbench. I dusted off a load rating chart, a stack of NYSDOT inspection forms, and a hardcover copy of the AASHTO manual for bridge evaluation that Lila had given me for our 20th anniversary, with a note inside the front cover that read in her careful blue ink, "For my favorite engineer, may every span you love outlive you." The cement trucks did not stop. They multiplied. By the end of the first week of April, I counted 47 crossings over 5 business days. By the middle of the second week, the count was up to 19 per day. The Pell trucks were joined by an aggregate company out of Cambridge, a flatbed hauler that brought in steel rebar, and a long bed Peterbilt towing an articulated dump truck on a lowboy. The lowboy alone was 140,000 pounds, with the equipment loaded. It crossed my 126-year-old wrought iron bridge at 11 in the morning on the second Wednesday of April, and the deck planks under it sang the kind of song I had spent a career teaching young engineers to listen for. I started keeping records the way I had taught my crews to keep them. I set up 2 GoPro cameras at opposite ends of the bridge, time-synced to a network clock, and aimed to capture license plates and DOT placards from both directions. I mounted a third camera under the bridge, on a tripod in the dry creek bed, aimed at the lower cord eye-bar connections. I rigged a strain gauge to the third panel point of the lower cord, the one most likely to show fatigue first, and ran the wires up to a data logger in my workbench shed. The data logger sampled at 100 Hz and time-stamped every reading. Within 48 hours, I had a complete digital fingerprint of every vehicle crossing my bridge, including axle weights derived from the strain response. That, by the way, is a takeaway worth remembering. If a neighbor or a contractor is using your private bridge, road, or culvert without your permission, modern strain gauge equipment is small, affordable, and admissible. A bridge tells you exactly how much it weighs by how much it bends. The math is older than the bridge. The numbers were terrible. The Pell trucks, fully loaded, were running between 36 and 42 tons. The lowboy with the dump truck was 141,000 pounds. The aggregate haulers were 38 tons average. The bridge was rated, by state-stamped inspection in 2019, at 6 tons posted with a maximum allowable of 8 tons under engineer escort. Every Pell vehicle was between 4 and 7 times the legal limit. Every crossing was, in the language of New York Vehicle and Traffic Law, Section 385, a violation of posted weight limits. Every crossing was also, by the same physics, accelerating fatigue cracking in eye bars my great-grandfather had heat-treated by hand. The damage began to show by the end of the second week. I crawled under the bridge with a flashlight and the macro lens. On the south abutment, the lower cord eye bar pin connection had developed a hairline crack, about 3/4 of an inch long, radiating from the lower edge of the pinhole at a 45-degree angle. On the upper cord, the lateral bracing showed paint fracture at the panel point. The pin on the third panel point south had begun to migrate, almost imperceptibly, in its bore. By any honest reading of an AASHTO inspection, the bridge was no longer rated at 6 tons. It was approaching the threshold for outright closure. I called the Washington County Highway Superintendent, a friend of mine named Foster Heath. Foster and I had worked together for 11 years at NYSDOT before he took the local job. He drove out the next morning. He walked the bridge with me. He looked at the eye bars. He took his own photographs. He pulled out his tape measure and his pocket inclinometer and an ultrasonic thickness gauge he kept in a Pelican case. He worked for an hour without saying anything. Then he closed the case, looked up at me, and said one sentence. "Ev, I have to file this with state, and I have to file it today." He filed an imminent safety hazard notice with NYSDOT that afternoon. By close of business, the state had issued a formal posted reduction to 2 tons, effective immediately, and a recommendation that the bridge be closed entirely to commercial vehicles pending engineering review. Foster had county standard, closed to commercial vehicles, signs delivered to my farm the same afternoon. He helped me bolt them to the entrance railings. He shook my hand. He drove off. That evening, Vivian Pell drove past my farmhouse 3 times. The first time she slowed and stared at the new signs. The second time, she stopped at the gate and got out of her Cherokee. The third time, she did not bother to stop. She drove straight onto Ashford Lane, over my bridge, in her own personal vehicle, with the new closure signs flashing past her window. Pippin barked at her taillights. I added the dashcam footage to the binder. By the next morning, the binder had a tab labeled Contempt. Vivian Pell's response to the new posted weight limit was to file a complaint of her own. She did it on her HOA letterhead, on a Monday morning, hand-delivered to the office of the Washington County Board of Supervisors. The complaint accused me of interfering with lawful commercial access, abusing local code for personal grievance, and endangering the economic viability of a major county project. It demanded that the county revisit Foster Heath's safety determination and rescind the closure pending neutral engineering review. Foster called me the same afternoon. "Ev," he said, "she has the supervisor up here calling me 3 times before noon. I am holding the line. I just want you to know what kind of pressure is being applied." I thanked him. I asked him to put every call from a supervisor in writing. He told me he was already doing it. The county briefly lifted the closure for 48 hours pending what Vivian's complaint called an independent re-rating. During those 48 hours, Pell Construction Group ran 21 cement trucks across my bridge. The data logger caught every one. Foster's re-inspection at the end of those 48 hours showed visible crack propagation in 2 new I-bar locations. He restored the closure. The supervisor stopped calling him. Vivian did not stop. She held a press event at the Stonebrook Reserve sales office the following Thursday, with a glossy, easel-mounted photograph of the bridge behind her and a printed statement she handed to 2 local reporters. She accused me, by name, of being anti-development and anti-growth. She called me a bitter retiree using his property line to extort a community of working families. She suggested, in her own delicate phrasing, that perhaps the loss of my late wife had affected my judgment. That last sentence was the one that crossed the line for me. Up until then, I had been operating in what I would describe as professional patience. After that sentence, I started operating in something that had a slightly harder edge. I read the press release twice. I added it to the binder. I drove the certified copy of it to my attorney's office in Saratoga the next morning. My attorney is a man named Porter Lindgren. He is 71 years old, retired from a large Albany firm, and now runs a one-man practice out of a converted carriage house on Broadway. He specializes in historic preservation and rural easements. He read Vivian's press release. He read the original 1902 easement deed. He read Foster's safety determination. He read the new closure posting. He read the photographs of the I-bar cracks. He took off his reading glasses, set them on the leather blotter, and looked at me for a long minute. "Ev," he said, "have you ever heard of Curtis versus Foss, 1947, New York Court of Appeals?" I said I had, vaguely. He pulled the case from a shelf behind him without looking. He flipped to the headnote. He read aloud. "An easement granted in language specific to a particular use existing at the time of grant does not, by implication, expand to permit modern industrial use of a substantially different character without explicit re-grant or judicial recognition." He set the book down. "In 1902, your great-grandfather granted access for wagons, farm wagons, and agricultural implements. That is what the deed says. Wagons, farm wagons, agricultural implements. The case law in this state is unambiguous. A 1902 easement for hay wagons does not, as a matter of New York property law, convert in 2024 into an easement for 40-ton cement trucks supporting a 148-unit residential subdivision. That is not even close. That is not the same kind of use. That is not the same kind of impact. That is not the same kind of dominant estate. The Pell easement claim, on these facts, fails as a matter of law." He set the casebook aside. He looked at me over the rims of his glasses. "There is a second issue, possibly larger, the bridge." He pulled a folder out of his desk drawer. The folder held a single document with a New York State Historic Preservation Office cover sheet. I had filed for National Register nomination of the bridge in 2018. The application had been languishing in review for 6 years, the way these things often do. Porter had quietly written, on my behalf, to the New York SHPO and the National Park Service the previous month, asking for an expedited determination on the basis of imminent threat to the property. "Ev," he said, "the National Park Service has formally calendared the bridge for final determination at the end of next month. Federal Register notice has already gone to press. The Berlin Iron Bridge Company Pratt Truss over Slate Creek will be a federally listed historic property, by my read, in approximately 22 days. I looked at him. He looked at me. "And here is the part that matters," he said. "Once that designation is final, every subsequent unauthorized crossing of an overweight commercial vehicle on a federally listed historic structure triggers fines under Section 110 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Tiered penalty structure. The maximum, per documented knowing violation, can run upward of $75,000 per crossing. Per crossing, Ev. There is also, in egregious cases involving willful damage, criminal exposure, and the National Park Service has been looking for an enforcement case to make a point with." I sat in his office for another 2 minutes. I did not speak. Porter did not press me. He had been a lawyer for 46 years, and he knew when a man was building a sentence. Then I said, "Porter, I want you to write the letters. I do not want you to send them. Not yet. Hold them until I tell you." He smiled, the small private smile of an old man who has seen a few traps set in his career. "Ev," he said, "I'll have the drafts ready Friday." I drove home with the binder under my arm and the AM news playing low on the radio. The maples along Route 22 were just starting to bud, the pale green gold that only lasts about 4 days in upstate New York before it goes full chlorophyll. The sky was that hard April blue that makes you remember what the season is for. I rolled the window down and let the air come in. It smelled like wet earth and last fall's leaves and somebody burning a brush pile 2 ridges over. That afternoon I started the rest of the trap. The first piece was the data. I called my old strain gauge supplier in Schenectady and ordered 4 more high-precision load cells, a redundant data logger, and a cellular uplink module. By the following Friday, every crossing of the bridge was being logged in real time to a secure server in Albany. Every truck was photographed from 3 angles. Every license plate, every DOT number, every placard, every axle count was captured and indexed. The system could tell me, within an hour of any crossing, the gross weight of the vehicle, the time of crossing, the company on the door, and the resulting strain signature on the lower cord. The second piece was the New York Attorney General's office. New York has, since 2019, a dedicated HOA oversight unit inside the Bureau of Consumer Frauds and Protection. I drafted a complaint and Porter polished it. The complaint named Vivian Pell as HOA president of Stonebrook Reserve, named her husband Dalton Pell as principal of Pell Construction Group, documented the self-dealing and awarding the haul route, and provided 14 tabs of supporting evidence, including the corporate filings, the meeting minutes, the bank routing, and a copy of Vivian's own HOA newsletter celebrating the cost savings the easement was providing the project. The complaint was filed on a Tuesday morning. An investigator named Conrad Whitlock called me Wednesday afternoon, asked 4 polite questions, and confirmed receipt. The third piece was the National Park Service. I drove down to the regional office in Mabbittsville with Porter and Foster. We presented the bridge file, the damage photographs, the strain gauge data, and the certified inspection from Foster's office. The senior historian on the case was a woman named Eugenia Stockwell, a kind, bookish person in her mid-60s with reading glasses on a chain. She listened for 40 minutes. She asked, at the end, exactly one question. "Mr. Ashford, are the crossings continuing as we speak?" I told her they were. 17 yesterday, 11 so far this morning. She closed her file. She looked at Porter, then at Foster, then at me. "Gentlemen, I am going to expedite this. I do not normally use that word." The fourth piece was a former NYSDOT colleague of mine, a woman named Hartley Drummond. Hartley had been a senior bridge inspector for 28 years before retiring to a small farm 2 miles east of mine. She was also, by an accident of geography, a member of the Stonebrook Reserve HOA. Vivian had never put 2 and 2 together because Hartley's husband had bought the lot under his own name. Hartley had been quietly watching the board for 3 months. She had taken notes. She had photographs of every HOA meeting where Vivian voted on Pell construction matters without recusing herself. She had a spreadsheet of every vote and every dollar awarded. She had, by her own quiet count, 14 specific instances of conflict of interest decisions documented in board minutes that Vivian herself had drafted. Hartley brought all of it to my kitchen table in a manila folder on a Thursday evening. She did not stay for coffee. She set the folder down, patted Pippin on the head, and said one sentence. "Ev, when you pull the trigger on this, I want to be sitting in the front row." I told her she would be. The fifth piece was the easement question itself. Porter prepared a quiet title action under New York Real Property Actions and Proceedings law, asking the state court to formally declare that the 1902 easement did not, under Curtis v. Foss and its progeny, permit commercial construction, haul traffic. The action would land in Washington County Supreme Court the same week the National Register designation became final. The two cases would be in motion together. Pell's attorneys would be defending on two fronts before either of them realized the size of the second. By the last week of April, every piece was in place. The data was running. The Attorney General had an active file. The National Park Service had a date. The quiet title action was drafted. The HOA conflict of interest evidence was in the binder. Foster's safety closure was holding. The cement trucks were still crossing. I sat on the porch that evening, the last evening before everything was in place, with a glass of bourbon and the binder open on the small cedar table Lila and I had used for 30 years as our outdoor reading desk. The crickets were just starting up. The maples along the lane were doing the rustle they do at last light. Pippin was at my feet with his chin on my boot. I thought about Lila for a long time. I thought about my great-grandfather, who had hand-fit each eye-bar at the East Berlin Works in 1898 and ridden the rail car up with the components himself to supervise the assembly. I thought about the 17-year-old kid I had been the summer my own father had taught me to walk a truss, with a hand on the upper cord and one foot on the lower. I thought about how many bridges I had inspected in 30 years, and how many had failed because somebody important could not be told no. This one was not going to fail. Not on my watch. Not on Lila's bridge. I did not stop them. That is the part I want to be honest about. By that point, I could have stopped them with a court order. I had enough cause. But every additional crossing, after the federal designation came down, was going to be worth more to the eventual case than any restraining order I could have served. Vivian Pell did not know that. She was, as she had been from the first day, completely confident that she would win. I let her keep being confident. I let the trucks keep coming. I let the data logger keep recording. The trap, in engineering terms, was load to failure. You let the structure tell you when it has had enough. Sometimes the structure is a bridge. Sometimes the structure is a person. Vivian's pressure climbed through the rest of April, the way pressure climbs in a system right before something gives. She tried, first, the financial route. Through her husband's company, she had an offer hand-delivered to my mailbox in a thick cream envelope. Pell Construction offered me $60,000 in cash to settle the easement question privately and grant a 5-year commercial access license for the bridge. The offer was timed, by my read, to land exactly when she believed I would be most exhausted. I read it standing on the porch in my barn jacket. I added it to the binder. I did not respond. When the cash offer went unanswered, she tried the social route. She filed 3 more next-door posts naming me directly, this time accusing me of obstructing affordable housing in Washington County. She got a local stringer for one of the Albany papers to write a sympathetic piece on the imperiled future of Stonebrook Reserve. The piece quoted Vivian saying that one bitter retired engineer is single-handedly threatening the dreams of 148 families. It did not quote me. It did not mention that the bridge was over 120 years old. It did not mention that the easement specifically referenced wagons. I let it run. The article did not change a single fact. When the social route did not work either, she tried intimidation. On a Tuesday night in the last week of April, at almost exactly 3 in the morning, I was woken up by the sound of a diesel engine in my barn lane. Pippin was already on his feet. I went to the window. A yellow articulated excavator with a tracked carriage was being driven slowly down the gravel drive past my barn, headlights blazing, the operator visible in the cab. The machine did not stop. It rolled to the bridge. idled at the entrance for about 30 seconds with the closure sign caught in its headlights, and then turned and rolled back out the way it had come. It was a clear, unambiguous message. We can come here at any hour. We can come here with whatever we want. I caught all of it on the network of cameras. 4 angles, license plate clear, operator face clear, equipment identification number visible on the side of the boom. I emailed the entire package to Porter at 5:15 in the morning. Porter forwarded it to Conrad Whitlock at the Attorney General's office at 7. By 10, Whitlock had called me back personally to confirm that the excavator's operator had been identified as Dalton Pell's younger brother, and that the visit, in combination with the documented HOA conflict pattern, was being added to the active investigation file under a separate count for witness intimidation. The next morning, a registered letter arrived from the New York State Historic Preservation Office. The letter was 3 pages. The first page used the words "expedited final determination." The second page used the words "Section 106 review triggered." The third page used the words "effective date of National Register listing." The effective date was 11 days away. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand and the smell of cinnamon bread coming out of the oven from the small loaf I had baked that morning, because cinnamon is what my kitchen smells like since Lila. 11 days. 11 days of legal cement trucks would, on the new federal status, become 11 days of evidence. Every crossing after the listing date would be a documented violation under federal law, with documented strain gauge data, documented photographs, documented placards, and documented receipts from Pell Construction Group's own concrete delivery dispatch logs, which Hartley had quietly copied from the project office bulletin board for me 3 weeks earlier. Vivian Pell, of course, did not know any of this. She kept escalating, the way a person does when she has built a long career on the assumption that nobody is keeping the same kind of records she is. Her final move, and the one that gave me the stage, came on the last Friday of April. She announced, with the trademark glossy printing of every Stonebrook Reserve communication, a grand opening investor tour, scheduled for the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. The tour would feature a chartered coach, 2 state assemblymen, several major out-of-state investors, 3 regional reporters, the developer's family, the senior partners of the firm financing Pell Construction's bridge loan, and a ribbon cutting at the gatehouse. The marketing piece included a route map. The route map ran the tour bus directly across my bridge. The piece included a photograph of the bridge with the caption, "Reserve Bridge, a charming welcome to Stonebrook." She had named my great-grandfather's bridge after her HOA, in print, on glossy paper, mailed to 200 investors. I read the piece sitting on the porch with Pippin at my feet and Hartley standing at the railing. "Ev," Hartley said, "she is going to drive a tour bus across that bridge on the same morning the federal designation goes effective." "Yes," I said. "On purpose," she said. "By the calendar," I said. Hartley nodded once. She looked out at the bridge in the long, late afternoon light. The Slate Creek behind it was running high and clear with snowmelt. The iron of the truss had that particular dusty rust color that wrought iron gets in spring. "Ev," she said, "I would like to be at your gate at 5:30 Saturday morning, in my old NYSDOT vest, with my camera." I told her I would have coffee ready. Memorial Day Saturday came in cold and quiet. The temperature at dawn was 41 degrees. The mist on Slate Creek was thick enough to swallow the lower chord of the bridge for the first hour. The maples along Ashford Lane were full leaf now, that dense first of summer green, and the smell of the morning was wet bark and creek stones, and the small bitter top note of bracken fern. By 5:30, my farmhouse was the gathering point for what amounted to a coordinated federal, state, county, and civil legal arrival, the likes of which Washington County had probably not seen in 50 years. Porter Lindgren arrived first in his old Saab. Foster Heath arrived second in the county highway truck, with a second NYSDOT engineer beside him. Hartley Drummond was third, in her old field vest, with 2 cameras and a notebook. Eugenia Stockwell of the National Park Service was fourth, with a senior preservation officer from the New York SHPO in the passenger seat and a federal compliance binder in her lap. Conrad Whitlock from the New York Attorney General's office came fifth, with a deputy AG named Adelaide Cushman, who had driven up the night before from Albany. A federal marshal arrived sixth, in a dark Ford Explorer, carrying a sealed envelope I had been told would contain federal subpoenas for Vivian Pell and Dalton Pell. Last came a senior assistant United States attorney named Linus Ottinger from the Northern District, who I had met once, briefly, on a Hudson River Bridge collapse case in 2012. They parked along my drive in a neat row. They drank coffee on my porch. The federal designation of the Berlin Iron Bridge Company Pratt Truss over Slate Creek had become officially effective at midnight Eastern. The bridge, as of 6 hours before sunrise, was a federally listed historic property protected under the National Historic Preservation Act. At 6:22, Eugenia Stockwell and her colleague walked down Ashford Lane to the bridge with a roll of federal placards. The placards were bright orange and white, with the Department of the Interior arrowhead at the top and the bold print warning at the bottom. Closed by order of U.S. Department of the Interior. Historic structure. Unauthorized crossing subject to 36 CFR Section 79 and 800 and 16 U.S.C. Section 470. They bolted 3 placards to the south approach railing and 3 to the north. The fog was just beginning to lift off the creek. The Stonebrook Reserve tour bus rolled up Ashford Lane at 7:48 in the morning. The bus was a chartered Prevost in pearl white, the kind that runs charter routes between New York and Boston, with smoked windows and a luxury wrap that read, Stonebrook Reserve Grand Opening Tour. Behind it followed 3 SUVs, then Vivian's Pearl Cherokee, then Dalton Pell's silver Mercedes, then another 2 SUVs carrying late-arriving investors. The procession slowed as it approached the bridge. The bus did not get on the bridge. Federal placards lit up in the early sun. The driver, a professional charter operator named Wendell Mott, stopped the bus 30 feet short, set the parking brake, and got out to investigate. He had been driving charter buses for 26 years. He had a Class BCDL endorsement and a federal driver's record. He read the placards. He read the regulatory citations. He walked back to the bus, opened the door, and announced over the intercom that the bridge was closed by federal order. Vivian Pell's Cherokee swerved around the bus and came to a hard stop in front of the placards. She got out without closing her door, her quilted vest catching on the seatbelt. She walked up to the bridge in heels and a coral pink scarf. She read the placards. She turned around. She found me on the porch above the road, with Porter and Foster on one side, and Eugenia and Adelaide on the other, and Pippin sitting at my feet like a sergeant of arms. Mr. Ashford, she called, the way she had called me Mr. Ashford from the very first phone call 8 weeks earlier. This is unacceptable. We have an event today. We have investors. You will be moving these signs immediately. I did not move from the porch. Adelaide Cushman walked down the steps in her dark blazer, with the federal marshal beside her. Mrs. Pell, I am a Deputy Attorney General for the state of New York. The marshal beside me is from the United States District Court for the Northern District. We have between us a federal cease and desist order under the National Historic Preservation Act, a state quiet title action in Washington County Supreme Court, an Attorney General complaint for HOA self-dealing under New York General Business Law, a federal subpoena addressed to your husband, a separate federal subpoena addressed to you, and a preliminary penalty notice from the National Park Service in the amount of $3,420,000, calculated as the documented cumulative crossings of overweight commercial vehicles since the effective date of federal listing, plus prior period damages assessed under Section 110. Vivian's mouth opened. She did not get to use it. Adelaide kept going. The bridge is closed. Your tour will not be crossing it today or any subsequent day. We will need you and Mr. Pell to remain on site for service of process and brief initial questioning. Your bus and your guests are free to leave. They will not be entering Stonebrook Reserve by this route. Dalton Pell came up from behind his wife in a tan blazer with a coffee cup in his hand. He stopped about 4 feet behind her. He set the coffee cup down on the gravel without saying a word. Eugenia Stockwell stepped forward last. She did not raise her voice. She did not lecture. She simply handed Vivian a 4-page packet stapled at the corner. Mrs. Pell, this is your formal Section 106 finding. The Berlin Iron Bridge Company, Pratt Truss, over Slate Creek, is a federally listed historic structure as of 0001 this morning. Your continued use of it under contested easement for the past 9 days alone constitutes 41 documented knowing violations of federal law. The penalty per violation may be assessed in your individual capacity, your husband's individual capacity, and your homeowners association's corporate capacity. Have a nice morning. The tour bus driver, Wendell Mott, who had been watching the whole exchange, leaned out of the open door of the bus and said, in the carrying voice of a charter driver who had seen a lot, "Folks, I'm going to need to turn this rig around." There was a long, slow shuffle of investors, stepping off the bus in their loafers and quilted vests, looking at the placards, looking at the federal marshal, looking at the orange Department of the Interior arrowhead in the morning sun. Two of them got back on the bus immediately. One of the assemblymen quietly took the elbow of his aide and walked back to his SUV. The reporter from the Albany paper was already filming on her phone. Marjorie Treadwell, who had written one of the early sympathetic pieces about Vivian, lowered her phone and walked over to me on the porch and asked, very quietly, if I would have time later in the week to give her a full statement on the record. I told her I would. I told her to bring 2 notepads. The aftermath ran longer than the morning. The federal action moved fast. Pell Construction Group negotiated, after 11 months of motion practice, a settlement with the Department of the Interior and the state of New York for $2.1 million in penalties, plus a court-ordered full structural restoration of the bridge at Pell's expense, plus 3 years of probationary federal contracting status. Dalton Pell personally paid an additional $190,000 in individual fines. The Stonebrook Reserve project was delayed 18 months for environmental and historic compliance review, which 2 of the major investors used as cause to withdraw their financing. 2 of the 3 local newspapers eventually corrected their earlier coverage of me. Vivian Pell was removed as HOA president of Stonebrook Reserve by a vote of 41-4 at an emergency board meeting in June. She was barred by the Attorney General's consent order from holding any HOA officer position in New York State for the next 8 years. She paid a personal civil penalty of $72,000. She and Dalton sold their Stonebrook lot in the fall and moved to a smaller property in Albany County. Hartley Drummond was elected the new HOA president at the same emergency meeting on a write-in motion by acclamation. The quiet title action in Washington County Supreme Court was decided on summary judgment in my favor in September. The 1902 easement was formally declared to permit only wagons, farm wagons, and agricultural implements consistent with the original grant, and a permanent injunction was entered prohibiting any commercial or construction vehicle use of Ashford Lane or the Slate Creek Bridge by Stonebrook Reserve or Pell Construction Group or their successors and assigns. The injunction was recorded on the deed. It will outlive me. The restoration of the bridge took 14 months. A federally approved historic preservation firm, supervised by Eugenia Stockwell and the New York SHPO, hot-riveted new eye-bars at the damaged panel points, replaced the corroded lower cord pins, restored the lateral bracing, and applied a period-correct iron oxide primer in 3 coats. The bridge was rededicated on a Saturday morning in October, in front of about 60 neighbors and a brass plaque the township paid for. The plaque bears the new name agreed to by my daughter, the township historian, and the SHPO. The Lila Ashford Memorial Bridge, 1898, restored 2025. The plaque has a small line at the bottom that reads, in italic, "For my favorite engineer." I used the Personal Damages Award from the civil case to start the Slate Creek Heritage Bridge Trust. The trust now funds preservation surveys for small, rural, iron truss bridges owned by elderly landowners across upstate New York, Vermont, and western Massachusetts. In its first year, the trust has paid for 11 survey assessments, 3 emergency repairs, and 1 full restoration of a covered bridge in Rensselaer County. Foster Heath chairs the board. Porter Lindgren handles the legal. Hartley Drummond runs operations. I sign the checks. The first annual Ashford Bridge Walk happened the Memorial Day weekend after the rededication. About 140 people came. The middle school history class from Granville did a presentation on iron truss construction. There were maple syrup cookies. Tess and the grandkids drove up from Albany. Beckett, my grandson, who is 6, ran the deck of the bridge end to end about 17 times. Pippin ran with him every time. The afternoon was bright and clear and smelled like new grass and creek water. Tess stood beside me at the rail of the bridge for a long, quiet stretch in the middle of the afternoon, watching the kids and the dog. She had her mother's eyes, and she had Lila's habit of standing with her hands shallowly tucked into her back pockets when she was about to say something important. The wind moved her hair the way it used to move her mother's. She did not look at me when she finally spoke. "Dad," she said, "she would have loved this." I did not trust my voice for a few seconds. I just nodded. Down the creek, a kingfisher came up off the water with a small silver flash in its beak, swung once across the bridge, and disappeared into the willows on the far bank. The deck under our feet held steady. The eye-bars sang the small ringing settle that wrought iron makes when it knows it is doing the work it was built to do. The plaque caught the late afternoon light and turned the same pale gold the maples turn in the first week of October. So that's how it ended. A woman who decided she could drive her husband's cement trucks over my great-grandfather's bridge cost her family $2.3 million, her own HOA presidency, and a development project that may not finish at all. A bridge that nearly cracked under the weight of contempt got rebuilt under the weight of restoration. A neighborhood that had been told one woman ran things learned, by autumn, that it ran itself just fine. If you've ever been bullied by an HOA, used as a haul road by a developer, or steamrolled by a board with conflicts you could see from the street, drop your story in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every one. Your story might be the next one we tell. If you stayed with me to the end and felt that bus pull up to the federal placards in the morning fog, do me one favor. Hit subscribe. There is another HOA story coming next week, and it is even crazier than this one. Until then, take care of your land, know your structure, and remember, the prettiest bridge in the county is the one somebody has bothered to read the rating on.
Here's a lesson hidden inside Everett Effa's $2 million Memorial Day. Vivian Pell did not lose because she met a louder neighbor. She lost because she met one who has spent 30 years measuring exactly how much weight a structure can carry before it breaks. He measured her too. He let her keep loading the case until it fell under its own weight. The real takeaway is this: if somebody is using your lane, your road, your bridge, or your easement in the way the deed never permitted, you have more leverage than you think. Easements are interpreted by their original language, not by modern convenience. Historic structures carry federal protections most homeowners never read. State HOA oversight units exist in most states, and they take self-dealing complaints seriously. The law is built for the owner with the better paperwork. If you have lived through your own HOA nightmare, drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, where a retired school teacher takes on a boat that tried to sire her late husband's veteran's memorial garden. Until then, keep your report, mind your easement language, and remember, in property law, the deeds always outrank the opinion.